very much. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I hope that all of the planners for this event are pleased with this fantastic turnout. I can only hope that the number of you standing represent the numbers they didn't expect to show up. And so this attendance is truly gratifying, not only to the planners, but of course to all of us who are here, to know that so many of us share in recognizing these important people, but also recognizing ourselves, recognizing these important people. Buried within the walls of the cemetery lie the remains of Adam, Ben Boston, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, and Charles, and other slaves of African descent who lived in Brookline and whose names are not known to us. In their memory and in their honor, this memorial is dedicated. I would like to use this opportunity to say a few words about that word, memory. When I worked at the Museum of Afro-American History, I did a lot of talking to young people about memory. And in most of those speeches and following discussions, I asked them to think about the opposite of memory. The opposite of memory, which is, of course, amnesia. When we lose our memory, we lose so much. We lose the ability to know where and when we are. And to not know where and when you are at an extremely disadvantage in deciding where and when you should go and be next. But if you have no memory, you have no present. And if you have no present, you have no place to make judgments and decisions and plans for a future. Some of us here are religious, and almost every religion has a word for the opposite of amnesia, a word for the most important memories. Christians use a Greek word for that. They call it anamnesis. It is the most important things that you should know. And so Muslims have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know about Muhammad. Christians have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know. Jews have an anamnesis, the most important things they should know, the things that they repeat again and again to their children to define who they are. And we are here engaged in an anamnesis. We are engaged in overcoming an amnesia about ourselves. an amnesia about our community, an amnesia about our nation, an amnesia about our culture. So we are here to recall, to recollect, to remember. This recalling will not be an easy exploration for us. Slavery and the slave trade in the Americas existed longer than emancipation and civil rights has yet existed. If you use 1619 as the approximate date of the introduction of slavery in North American British colonies that would become the United States of America, slavery lasted for 246 years. It will not be until 2111 that people of African descent will have been free as long as they were enslaved in the United States. Even in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, on that island that the Spaniards called Hispaniola, where the first successful revolt against slavery occurred, slavery lasted about 285 years. It will be 2085 before Haitians and Dominicans will have been free as long as they have been enslaved. To move from the myth of slavery as an incidental occurrence in the early days of the European occupation of the Americas to the truth of slavery as part of the truth of the origins of the nations of the Americas, and specifically of the origins and economic success of the United States, will require the production of a new memory, a new paradigm of our founding. Consider this in that new paradigm of our founding. The first record of a group of African people arriving in Massachusetts is found in John Winthrop's journal that he called The History of New England. In his July 1637 notation, John Winthrop wrote, "We had now slain in all about 700. He's talking about Indians, the indigenous people that they found here after their first war with them. "We sent 15 of the boys and 2 women to Bermuda by Mr. Pierce, but he, missing it, carried them to Providence Isle. William Pierce was the captain of the Desire, which was a ship built in Marblehead and sailed out of Salem. Providence Isle was a Puritan settlement off the coast of Central America." And then, in an entry dated February 26, 1638, Winthrop writes in his journal, "Mr. Pierce in the Salem ship the Desire returned from the West Indies after 7 months. He had been at Providence and brought some cotton and tobacco and Negroes from thence, and salt from the Tortugas." Lorenzo Green, the author of The Negro in Colonial New England, calls this statement the earliest recorded account of Negro slavery in New England. Negroes may have been enslaved before that time, but earlier allusions to slavery are inferential. The founders of who we are today as a nation, the founders of us as a nation, are all in this story. The Aboriginal, the native people, the English, the Europeans, and the Africans. What in our language would be called the red, the white, and the black. And they all must be in this new paradigm if it is to approach the truth. Now, this story is, of course, a horrible story. But in this revised paradigm, it is not all awful. In this revised paradigm is our civic scripture. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, in decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our civic scripture, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. This new paradigm will always have space to ask, who is the our? Who is the we? Adam Hochschild in Bury the Chains, that history of the end of slavery in the British Empire, points out that at the end of the 18th century, when these words were being written, well over 3/4 of all people alive were in bondage somewhere in the world. In bondage. These were remarkable words to be said at that time. Yet, who were the our? Who were the we? In March of last year, then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice gave a remarkable interview. She was asked about race. And she said, well, you know, America doesn't have an easy time dealing with race. I sit in my office and the portrait immediately over my shoulder is Thomas Jefferson, because he was the first Secretary of State. And sometimes I think to myself, what would he think? A black woman Secretary of State is his predecessor 65 times removed. What would he think that the last two successors have been black Americans? And so obviously when this country was founded, the words that were enshrined in all our great documents and that have been such an inspiration to the people of the world, they didn't have meaning for an overwhelming element of our founding population. The black Americans were a founding population. Africans and Europeans came here and founded this country together. Europeans by choice, Africans in chains. And that's not a very pretty reality of our founding. And I think that particular birth defect, she says, makes it hard for us to confront it, hard for us to talk about it, hard for us to realize that it has continuing relevance for who we are today. That particular birth defect needs to be in our paradigm, our founding memory. And so we deal daily with this contradiction. This new paradigm will acknowledge all who own these words by hearing, heeding, and incorporating them. What is remarkable about all of these words, written by so many slave owners, is that once they were written down, once they were spoken, they no longer belong to them. They no longer belong to them. When poor white men heard them, they said, oh no, we should be able to vote too. When women heard them, they said, oh no, we are not property inside families. When black people heard them, they said, oh no, we are in the we. We are in the our. The words do not belong to those who wrote them or spoke them. They belong to those who hear them and heed them. This new paradigm is necessary to abolish the artificial concept of race, a construct invented in the 15th and 16th centuries and refined in the 17th, 18th, and 19th in order to make slavery more efficient by confining, reserving it to Africans and people of African descent, and preserved to the present in order to preserve their descendants in profitable states of discrimination and what we call racism. Maya Angelou wrote, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced without courage, need not be lived again." To do this recalling, this facing with courage, we must confront horror. In our paradigm is horror. In the paradigm of our founding, native, aboriginal first people were killed to secure the land. Africans were worked to death in order to exploit that land. Before the suppression of the slave trade, the birth rate among most enslaved African women was always considerably lower than the birth rate in their birth rate in Africa. This only changed when it became illegal and thus too expensive to import Africans. And we must confront money, because it was all done for money. In 1860, more wealth existed in the accumulated value of slaves in the United States than in any other sector of the economy except land. Only the total value of land in the United States exceeded the total value of enslaved men, women, boys, and girls in this nation in 1860. 400,000 human beings who could be bought and sold. And this does not include the secondary economies to maintain slavery, the food, the codfish to feed them, and the Negro cloth to clothe them, and the chains and shackles to bind them were made. And that does not include the value of the products they produced, manufactured into rum and cigars, and the most valuable of all for the United States, cotton textiles. And this does not include the value of philanthropy. T.H. Perkins, a Bostonian before the American Revolution, was a slave trader in Haiti. In 1785, he took part in what was then euphemistically called the China trade. The China trade, of course, began as a drug trade. And T.H. Perkins bought opium in Turkey and sold it in China. And in later years, Perkins became a philanthropist. In 1826, he and his brother James contributed half the sum that was needed to build an addition to the Athenaeum, the Boston Athenaeum. He donated his mansion to a financially troubled Massachusetts Asylum for the Blind in 1832. And they, in gratitude, renamed their institution the Perkins School for the Blind. This is a history that must be part of our new paradigm. Buried within this old burying ground are the remains of Adam, Ben, Boston, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, and Charles, and of other slaves of African descent who lived in Brookline and whose names are not known to us. The memory of them can be honored by becoming incorporated into our memory. The memory of them can be honored by us recalling the truth of slavery, that particular birth defect, as part of the truth of the origins of the nations of the Americas, and specifically of the origins and economic success of the United States. by us producing and using a new paradigm of truth. In the 19th century, Theodore Parker taught Bostonians, look at the facts of the world. You see a continual progressive triumph of the right. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long. Or as Martin Luther King liked to rephrase it, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Thank you. If we can place our attention to the memorial engraving where the kente cloth is draped over, please join me in giving a round of applause for these slaves who now have a voice in Brookline's history. By finally remembering and honoring and laying to rest the names you've heard so many times this afternoon: Adam, Kate, Hagar, Venus, Seiko, Felix, Boston, Dinah, Charles, and Ben Boston.